February 1981. Pomona Drag Strip. The NH Winter Nationals. The Super Bowl of drag racing. The race that kicks off every season, the one every team in the country shows up for wanting to prove they're the best. Raymond Beadle is already a two-time defending world champion. He's the most consistent funny car driver in the sport. He has survived fire, blown engines, crashes, and the kind of sustained pressure that grinds most racers into the pavement. He is by any reasonable measure the man to beat. And then his roof blows off. Not figuratively. Literally. The fiberglass body on Beadle's blue Max Dodge Omni, the entire painted shell, the famous blue and gold livery, the poor Lumerite emblem, just separates from the car at speed and becomes airborne. Now, most people in that situation panic. You've just lost your body panel at a national event. Your championship is on the line. Season opener, maximum pressure. Raymond Beadle walks back to the pits and says two words. No problem. Because he already knows what he's going to do. His childhood best friend, Lubbock, Texas classmate, and fellow nitromethane lunatic Kenny Bernstein is parked 3 pit slots away. Bernstein's Budweiser King Funny Car has a spare body in the trailer. And so what followed next became one of the most legendary moments in funny car history. The Blue Max crew and the Budweiser crew grabbed a reciprocating saw, cut Bernstein's spare body to fit the Blue Max chassis, and grafted it together right there in the Pomona pit. They called it the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And Beadle went back out there and ran the car. That is the story of Raymond Beadle and the Blue Max in miniature. Composed when everyone else would be rattled. Resourceful when everyone else would be defeated. And cool enough to walk away from a disaster with a catchphrase and a grin. This is legacy motoring, and I spend way too much time thinking about the forgotten champions of American motorsports who shaped the entire landscape of racing without ever getting the mainstream recognition they deserve. If you're someone who loves deep dive stories about the drivers, the teams, and the moments that built drag racing and NASCAR into what they are today, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Raymond Gary Beadle was born December 16, 1943 in Spur, Texas. If you've never heard of Spur, Texas, don't feel bad. It's got roughly 500 people and more open sky than most people ever see in a lifetime. His family moved to Lubbock when he was 10 years old. And Lubbock is where everything starts. Now Lubbock in the 1950s and 60s is this flat, hot, endless West Texas city with a university and a lot of wide, empty road. And wide, empty roads in America in those decades had a universal purpose. You found the longest straight stretch. You found somebody else with a fast car, and you raced. Beadle found 34th Street. As one piece about him put it with beautiful understatement, it's tough to race traffic light to traffic light in a town that doesn't even have a traffic light. But they found a way. They always find a way. He went to Texas Tech, marketing and agriculture. And for a while he worked for the Texas Department of Agriculture. This is important later, the marketing part, because Raymond Beadle was going to turn out to be one of the smartest marketers in the history of American motorsports. But we'll get there. The organized racing started in 1963. Modified Chevrolet injected A&N competition class. He was good at it. Good enough that by the late 1960s he's driving top fuel dragsters for team owners, running Division IV events, reaching the semifinals at the NHRA World Finals in Amarillo 2 years straight, 1971 and 1972. That's not a small thing. That's making the Final Four at the most important race of the year twice in a row. But Top Fuel isn't where Beadle's story lives. Funny cars are where Beadle's story lives. He made the jump in 1971 driving the stud Mustang, a former gas Ronda car, which immediately tells you something about the lineage he was stepping into. Then a Vega-bodied car for Mike Burkhart. And then the move that positioned everything else. 1973, driving for Don Schumacher's 3-car funny car team, the Continental Baking Company's Wonder Wagons. Schumacher's operation was professional, organized, funded. Beadle drove hard, saved every dollar, and learned. And when his time with Schumacher ended, he said it plainly. I started the Max with the money I saved from driving for Schumacher. He was 30 years old. He had a plan. And he had a phone call to make. Here's something most people don't know. Raymond Beadle didn't create the Blue Mac. He inherited it, rebuilt it, bought it, and then turned it into something far bigger than it had ever been. But the name, the concept, the first car, that was someone else's genius. His name was Harry Schmidt. Schmidt was a tuner out of the Midwest who built himself a blue-painted Ford Mustang Funny Car in the late 1960s. In the fall of 1969, Schmidt saw a movie, the 1966 George Peppard film The Blue Max, about World War I German fighter pilots competing for the Pour le Mérite, the German Empire's highest military decoration. A blue enameled Maltese cross with golden eagles, informally called the Blue Max for pilots who earned it in aerial combat. Schmidt, who had a German last name, who had a blue car, he saw that medal and said, "That's us." And the Blue Max debuted at the 1970 NHRA Winter Nationals, the very same event where Beadle's roof would blow off a decade later. Schmidt was technically brilliant. The innovations he brought to funny cars in the early 1970s are still felt today. He was the first to put a quick-change rear end in a funny car. First to run a big fuel pump. He developed hand-operated air jacks with Pat Foster and Jim Hume, the precursor to the pneumatic systems every team uses now. He built the oversized tool trays that became standard in every funny car pit in America. The man was a creator. But by 1972, Schmidt was burned out. 100 race dates a year will do that. He parked the operation. And that's where Beadle walked in. Summer of 1974, he approached Schmidt about a partnership. Beadle would drive and handle the business. Schmidt would tune. And they shook hands on one of the most productive partnerships in the sport's history. The reborn Blue Max debuted in early 1975 as a Mustang II, and immediately it started winning. The 1975 U.S. Nationals at Indianapolis. Beadle beat Don Prudhomme in the final with the car leaking oil and crewman waterbed Fred Miller hand-tightening a fitting bare-handed seconds before the run. National elapsed time record, 6.14 seconds. The 1975 NHRA Funny Car Championship. And the 1976 NHRA Championship again. In 1976, between April and June alone, the Blue Max went 30-0 in match races, against Prudhomme, against Ed McCulloch, against Tom McEwen, against Jim Lieberman, against Tommy Evo. 30-0. By 1976, Beadle had bought Schmidt's share of the operation outright. And here's the first hint of Beadle's business instincts. He immediately turned around and demanded and got 4 times the appearance fee Schmidt had been accepting for match races. Just like that. 4 times. Because Raymond Beadle understood something that most drag racers at the time did not. You don't beg for what you're worth. You know what you've got and you act accordingly. Schmidt departed fully after the 1978 season, and a new tuner stepped into the role who would prove to be equally brilliant in completely different ways. His name was Dale Emery. They called him the Snail. He joined the team with his arm still in a cast from crashing at the 1977 U.S. Nationals. You get some sense of the caliber of personnel Beadle attracted. Emery was a fabricator and innovator who made the funny car engine a more refined instrument than it had ever been. Dual magneto ignition drives, down nozzles in cylinder heads for better fuel distribution, hand-fabricated 16-plug cylinder head, custom billet aluminum fuel pumps machined from scratch. People who worked with him compared his overall mechanical mastery to Big Daddy Don Garlitz's. You could hand him anything and he could build it, tune it, and make it faster than it was before. With Emery turning the wrenches and Beadle steering, the Blue Max was about to go on a run that nobody in funny car history had ever managed before. Let me put the 1979, 1980, 1981 stretch into context. Don Prudhomme won 4 consecutive NHRA Funny Car World Championships from 1975 through 1978. 4 in a row. He was the snake. He was the standard. He was the guy everyone was chasing. And Raymond Beadle chased him down, caught him, and passed him. 1979, 2 national event wins, 5 final round. Prudhomme finished second in points. The championship that ended the Snake's dynasty. Beadle won it with what became his signature approach. Not necessarily winning the most races, but being in the final round more consistently than anyone else, making the least mistakes, leaving the fewest points on the table. You have to remember, this isn't NASCAR where you score points every lap. In NHRA, you either win the round or you're done for the day. Consistency and reliability matter as much as raw speed. Here's what most people don't realize about that era of funny car racing. The margin between first and second in points was often razor thin. We're talking about a sport where a broken transmission, a blown blower belt, a tire shake at 60 feet could be the difference between a championship and runner-up. And Beadle went 3 straight years without letting those margins beat him. That's not luck. That's organizational discipline at a level that rivals anything in professional motorsport. 1980, 3 wins, his best single season. Columbus, Denver, Seattle. He set a national elapsed time record of 5.86 seconds at the Summer Nationals that year. 5 final round appearances. Championship runner-up was a young Texas racer named Billy Meyer, who Beadle had been mentoring for years. At the end of the season, Beadle was named to the American Auto Racing Writers and Broadcasters All-America team alongside Shirley Muldowney, Bobby Unser, Johnny Rutherford, Dale Earnhardt, and Cale Yarborough. Drag racing, NASCAR, IndyCar, all on the same team. That tells you where the sport was and where Beadle stood within it. 1981, 4 final rounds, won the U.S. Nationals at Indianapolis, his second Indy victory, and then did something nobody else managed. He also won the NHRA Funny Car Championship that same year. NHRA and NHRA title simultaneously. That had essentially never been done before and hasn't been repeated since. But 1981 also contains one of the most underappreciated moments in drag racing history. Mid-season, Beadle co-led with Billy Meyer and Paul Candy's a boycott of the Cajun Nationals. The drivers collectively refused to run. Their demands were better purses and better safety conditions. And here's the wild part. It worked. The boycott succeeded. Purses increased. It was the only time since 1970 that funny cars didn't compete at an NHRA national event where Top Fuel ran. And Beadle, the defending champion, the most prominent name in the class, put himself on the line for it. That's not just a champion. That's a leader. By the end of 3 straight championships, his total career record across both sanctioning bodies looked like this. 13 NHRA national event wins. 19 IHRA national event wins. 3 NHRA championship. 3 IHRA championship. He was ranked 20th on NHRA's list of the top 50 drivers in the organization's first 50 years. A list that put him alongside Garlitz, Prudhomme, Muldowney, Bernstein, and Force. And critically, he never once drove for anyone else. Every win, every championship, every pass down the quarter mile, the Blue Max was his car, his team, his operation from the ground up. There's a word for that in this sport, and the word is rare. Now, you might be thinking, okay, 3 championships, great career, solid legacy, but why does this man deserve the kind of deep dive treatment we usually reserve for the absolute icons? Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the championships are only one part of what Raymond Beadle built. There's a reason John Force, 16-time world champion, the most successful funny car driver in history, said he looked up to exactly 5 people in the sport. And Raymond Beadle was one of them. Alongside Garlitz, Prudhomme, Muldowney, and McEwen, that's the company he named. People who describe Beadle all hit the same note. Calm. Approachable. Funny. Generous. The Motorsports Hall of Fame of America wrote about the twinkle in his eye, a ready grin on his face, and his usually soft-spoken manner, but also how he could shift on a dime into dead serious businessman when the situation called for it. Don Prudhomme, who competed against him for years at the highest level, put it this way: "Things never really got animated between Beadle and myself. Raymond was the kind of guy who never got pissed off about anything. It was hard to not like Raymond Beadle." From Prudhomme. Not exactly a sentimental man. That's about as strong an endorsement as the sport produces. No problem was the catchphrase. It was the response to everything. Engine blew. No problem. Crashed the car. No problem. Rival just ran a quicker elapsed time. No problem. It became a legitimate piece of funny car culture. The verbal signature of a man whose composure was genuinely unusual in a sport that ran on adrenaline and anxiety. His crewman waterbed Fred Miller, who got his nickname from Emery after failing to fix a leaky waterbed, worked for the Blue Max from beginning to end. That kind of loyalty doesn't happen by accident. It happens because the guy you're working for treats people right, pays them fairly, and gives them something worth being loyal to. And then there's the fan connection. Beadle understood instinctively that the people watching from the fence were as important as the sponsors writing the checks. He'd walk the fence line. He'd stop and talk. He remembered names. At a time when a lot of championship-level racers were starting to get corporate and distant as the sport grew, Beadle stayed accessible. He understood that the fan who bought a t-shirt and shook your hand at the fence was also the fan who showed up to the next national event, and the one after that, and told their friends about the Blue Mac. That's the human side. Now let's talk about the business side, because that's where Beadle's impact on the sport goes deepest. Here's something you may not know about Raymond Beadle. He essentially invented the motorsports souvenir business as a revenue stream and a branding tool for drag racing teams. That's not hyperbole. Before Beadle, drag racing teams might have business cards or maybe a photograph to give away. After Beadle, the sport had a template for merchandise that other teams could follow and profit from. He did several things that seem obvious in hindsight but were genuinely novel at the time. First, he copyrighted and trademarked the Blue Max name. He commissioned artist Kenny Youngblood to create a definitive graphic version of the Pour le Mérite medal, the one that showed up on every car, every shirt, every hat. He owned it. It was intellectual property in an era when drag racing teams simply did not think in those terms. Nobody had a legal department. Nobody was filing trademarks at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Raymond Beadle from Spur, Texas, with his marketing degree from Texas Tech, was doing it while everyone else was still trying to figure out how to get a parts company to cover the cost of a new set of tires. Second, he actually sold merchandise. T-shirts, hats, hat pins, halter tops, jackets, decals, posters, set up at the track directly to fans. He turned the Blue Max into a brand that people wanted to wear, to own, to display. And the thing is, it worked so well that it became a problem for NHRA. The sanctioning body had to create regulations around on-site souvenir sales because so many teams were trying to replicate what Beadle had built. Eventually, that evolved into the main gate vendor system, the racer t-shirt trailer infrastructure that exists at every single NHRA national event today. The entire commercial apparatus that every team in the sport depends on for supplemental income can trace a direct line back to Beadle figuring out that fans would pay to be part of the story. Kenny Bernstein, his old Lubbock classmate, said it plainly. He was a great promoter. He was always hustling and putting things together and trying to take it to the next level. He was a real go-getter in everything from sponsorships to merchandising. Look, that's not just a compliment. That's a guy who built his own empire describing the template he watched being built in real time. His approach to sponsorships was equally ahead of its time. In an era when 90% of drag racing was sponsored by parts companies and oil brands, Beadle went after mainstream consumer brands. English leather cologne, Old Milwaukee beer, Valvoline, Schlitz, Kodiak tobacco, Napa's Regal Ride program. He understood that a car running at 250 miles per hour with a nationally recognized brand on the side was a marketing vehicle, no pun intended, that could deliver reach no conventional advertising could match. He was running an argument in every sponsorship meeting that Madison Avenue executives understood intuitively and drag racing team owners had never articulated. Your product needs eyeballs. I have eyeballs. Let's do business. NHRA's Phil Burgess wrote that Beadle approached the sponsorship equation not with hat in hand, as was typical of the era, but from a position of strength. He was a former Texas Department of Agriculture official with a marketing degree from Texas Tech, and he negotiated like it. The result was that by the late 1970s, the Blue Max was one of the best-funded single-car funny car operations in the sport, running a budget approaching $500,000 a year. Enormous money for the era. And he did it without a factory deal, without a Prudhomme-type patron. He built it from match race prize money and savvy negotiation. That's bootstrapping at a level that modern motorsports business schools would teach as a case study. Motortopia published the most vivid summary of what Beadle represented. If you could put together the positive attributes of the most successful funny car drivers in NHRA history, the intuitive nature of Jack Chrisman, the toughness of Don Prudhomme, the marketing genius of Tom McEwen, the showmanship of Tommy Evo, the popularity of Jim Lieberman, and the media savvy of John Force, you'd create a man named Raymond Beadle. 6 people. 1 composite. That tells you everything. You can't reduce him to one thing because he was genuinely excellent at all of them simultaneously. You can't tell the Blue Max story without the rivalries and the relationships, because this sport in that era was simultaneously fiercely competitive and tightly communal. The defining rivalry was Prudhomme. Always Prudhomme. The snake was the standard against which everything in funny car got measured from the early 1970s through the early 80s. Beadle beat him in 1975 at Indy with a leaking car and a barehanded crew fix. Beadle ended his dynasty in 1979. Prudhomme finished second in points in 1981. These two went at each other at national events, at match races, across thousands of track feet for a decade. And they were close friends the entire time. That was the thing about funny car racing in that era. The rivalries were real. The competition was genuine and fierce. But the community was small enough that you knew everyone. You ate dinner with the people you raced against. You shared information across team lines sometimes. You helped each other when cars blew up and haulers broke down. Prudhomme and Beadle weren't performing a feud for cameras. They genuinely competed hard and genuinely respected each other. There's a version of professional sports where that's impossible. Drag racing in the late 1970s made it not only possible but normal. Then there's Kenny Bernstein. The man who sawed his spare body apart for you in the Pomona pits is not just a competitor. He's a friend from junior high school. Bernstein and Beadle grew up together in Lubbock. They both started in Top Fuel. Both moved to Funny Car. Both built championship-caliber operations in the same era with the same West Texas sensibility, that quiet confidence that doesn't need to announce itself because the results do the announcing. While Beadle won 3 straight starting in 1979, Bernstein would go on to win 4 consecutive NHRA Funny Car Championships from 1985 through 1988 with tuner Dale Armstrong. 2 Lubbock kids, both at the absolute top of the sport. You couldn't write it. And then there's the guy who wasn't yet at the top. John Force. Force started his NHRA Funny Car career in 1977. He was in the field during Beadle's championship years, struggling. He wouldn't win his first NHRA national event until 1987 and his first championship until 1990. He was the hungry young competitor in those years, and Beadle was one of the champions he was trying to dethrone. Here's a detail that hits differently in retrospect. Force's team early in his career got their first matching uniforms from Raymond Beadle. Blue Max t-shirts. Beadle gave them to him. Just handed them over. No transaction, no strings attached. That's the kind of thing a generous person does for a younger competitor, and that's the kind of thing that gets remembered for the rest of a life. Force named Beadle among 5 people he looked up to in drag racing. 5. The others were Garlitz, Muldowney, Prudhomme, and McEwen. You don't end up on that short list by being strictly a competitor. You end up there by being someone worth aspiring to, someone who showed you how it was done and didn't make you feel small for watching. And the mentorship extended to Billy Meyer, the Texas racer who finished second in points to Beadle in both 1980 and 1982. Beadle mentored Meyer on sponsorships, on how to present yourself professionally, on how to run a team as a business rather than just a racing program. Beadle's wife, Holly, taught Meyer English. That level of personal investment in a rival competitor is unusual anywhere in professional sport. In motorsports, it's almost unheard of. Meyer later built the Texas Motorplex, one of the great facilities in drag racing history, and made sure Beadle was an honored VIP guest there for decades. Some debts don't get repaid in money. They get repaid in the long, quiet recognition that a person shaped your trajectory and you never forgot it. Now here is where the story gets genuinely strange. In 1983, Raymond Beadle, 3-time NHRA Funny Car World Champion, drag racing institution, nitromethane specialist, decided to buy a NASCAR Winston Cup team. Not invest in one. Not partner with someone. Buy one outright and run it himself. He purchased equipment from MC Anderson Racing, kept the number 27, called it Blue Max Racing, and went Winston Cup racing. He brought technology from drag racing that the stock car world had never seen. Titanium driveshaft, titanium spindles, piston and camshaft coatings that had been developed for funny car competition. The NASCAR teams didn't know what to make of any of it. There was this initial period where the Cup regulars looked at this drag racer from Texas with his weird coatings and his billet parts and thought, who is this guy and why does he think that works here? And then the results started coming in and the question changed to, how is he doing that and can we copy it? The first driver was Tim Richmond, one of the most talented and charismatic drivers of the era, a genuine personality who could have been the sport's biggest star if his life had gone differently. Richmond gave Beadle his first Cup win at Pocono in 1983, then North Wilkesboro in 1984. In 88 races together, 19 top 5 finishes. But Richmond departed for Hendrick Motorsports after 1985, and Beadle needed a new driver. He hired Rusty Wallace. And that's when Blue Max Racing became a championship team for the second time. Wallace joined in 1986 with crew chief Barry Dodson and chassis specialist Jimmy McCarr. The results were immediate. 2 wins in 1986. 2 wins in 1987, and then 1988, 6 wins, 19 top 5 finishes, a 7.1 average finish. Wallace finished second in the championship by 24 points to Bill Elliott. 24 points out of a full season. That close. Then 1989, Wallace won 6 races and defeated Dale Earnhardt by 12 points, one of the closest championship battles in NASCAR history, to win the Winston Cup Championship. Think about what had just happened. Raymond Beadle had now won a premier motorsports championship in 2 completely different disciplines. NHRA Funny Car champion 3 times. NASCAR Winston Cup champion once as a team owner. There is not another person in American motorsports history who can make that claim. Not one. The dual-discipline championship is his alone. Here's where it gets complicated, though, because 1989 wasn't just a triumphant year. It was also the year Wallace filed court papers mid-season trying to void his contract with Beadle, claiming late payments, wanting out to go drive for Roger Penske. The team won the championship while simultaneously dealing with a contract lawsuit between the owner and driver. Beadle's response to all of it was vintage. Asked about the situation at the time, he essentially shrugged. When I play poker, I know what I've got in my hand, and I like the cards I have. They won the title. Wallace dropped the lawsuit. He agreed to drive through 1990 before leaving for Penske. And when he left, he took the Miller Genuine Draft sponsorship with him. The deal was tied to Wallace personally, not the team. And Beadle shut down. Not gradually. Not with an announcement and a farewell tour. Abruptly. The team went dark. NBC Sports later reported that he surprised, rather shocked, the NASCAR community by abruptly closing up shop. He simply walked away. No extended explanation that fully satisfied anyone who was watching. The prevailing understanding among people close to the situation was that Beadle had built these operations on relationships, on trust, on handshakes that meant something. And when the relationship with Wallace ended the way it did, the heart went out of it. Roger Penske acquired Blue Max Racing's equipment. That equipment, that lineage, is what eventually became Team Penske's number 2 car. It's still racing today. Rusty Wallace's tribute after Beadle's death in 2014 said everything. Really saddened by news about Raymond Beadle. Without him, I would have never gotten to where I am today. That's the measure of what Beadle provided, not just equipment and sponsorship dollars, but the platform, the stability, and the organizational structure that allowed a talented driver to become a champion. Without the Blue Max operation, there might not have been a Rusty Wallace who was ready for Roger Penske. That's how these chains work in motorsports. One person builds the ladder, another person climbs it, and if the person who built it does the job right, both of them end up somewhere they couldn't have reached alone. We should talk about the actual machines because they're beautiful objects in their own right, and because the engineering story of the Blue Max is as interesting as the racing story. The Blue Max in its Schmidt era, 1970 through the mid-70s, was a Ford Mustang. Long nose, candy blue paint, the poor Lumerite emblem on the side. It was always blue. The name demanded it. Through the Mustang II era, then into Beadle's own development of the car, they ran a Plymouth Arrow in 1978, which Beadle later said was his personal favorite of all the cars he drove. There's something fitting about that. The Arrow was unusual, a compact body style that stood out in a field of Camaros and Mustangs, and Beadle loved it for exactly the reasons everyone else overlooked it. Then came the championship years and the car that made the Blue Max genuinely famous to a generation of drag racing fans. The Dodge Omni and Plymouth Horizon. A little front-wheel drive hatchback economy car that in production form was about as unthreatening as a vehicle could possibly be. The kind of car you rented at an airport and forgot about by the time you returned it. The Blue Max version made something in the neighborhood of 3,000 horsepower, ran on 85% nitromethane, and covered the quarter mile in under 6 seconds at speeds approaching 250 miles per hour. It became known in the paddock as the Wonder Car, partly because of what it could do, partly because of what it looked like doing it. The visual contrast between the humble hatchback shape and the absolutely violent performance it contained was part of what made it iconic. Under the body, the standard professional funny car power plant, the supercharged 426 Hemi. But what Emery did with it was anything but standard. Dual magneto ignition drives, down nozzles in the cylinder heads for better fuel distribution. Hand-fabricated 16 plug heads that he machined himself in the Blue Max shop. Vane-type fuel pumps built from billet aluminum. This was an in-house engine program at a level of sophistication that most factory-backed teams weren't achieving. The Blue Max did it as an independent operation, which made it all the more remarkable to the people who knew what they were looking at when they walked through that pit area. In 1982, the team transitioned to a Ford EXP body, a compact Ford with a distinctive sloped profile, and it's probably the most unusual-looking Blue Max ever fielded. Beadle slipped to 5th in points that year, had a barrel roll accident at Gainesville, and by 1983 was back in a Mustang body. He drove competitively through 1984, then transitioned to team owner mode, running Lil John Lombardo as driver. Lombardo won the 1985 U.S. Nationals in the Blue Max, the team's third Indy win across the operation's full history. The team built its own chassis on site at the Dallas shop. Pat Casares was the primary chassis builder. Pat Foster contributed. The Blue Max was end-to-end a self-sufficient race team in a way that was genuinely rare even by the standards of that era, when teams routinely relied on outside fabricators and outside engine builders for the components that defined their performance. Here's the thing about Beadle's retirement from driving and eventually from team ownership. It wasn't gradual and it wasn't reluctant. After walking away from NASCAR in 1990, Beadle did something that makes complete sense for a man from West Texas. He went back to West Texas. He ran cattle ranches in West Texas and Arkansas. He bred quarter horses at a farm near Valley View, Texas, and won grand championships doing it. He operated chaparral trailers, building race car transport trailers that became a standard choice for serious competitors across multiple racing disciplines. He was, by the accounts of people who knew him in those years, completely content. He didn't miss the paddock politics. He didn't miss the travel schedule. He didn't miss the logistics and the pressure and the constant negotiation. He'd done everything there was to do at the absolute highest level, and now he was done on his own terms. No problem. He stayed connected to the sport in other ways. Honored at the Texas Motorplex as Billy Meyer's special guest, showing up at events when invited, attending inductions and celebrations, but never in any capacity that suggested he wanted back in, never positioning himself for a return, never using his history as a hook for something current. He watched from a comfortable distance, proud of what had been built, and clearly at peace with the fact that the building was finished. There's a particular kind of confidence in that, the ability to close a chapter without needing to reopen it. Most people in his position would have found some way to stay attached, an advisory role, a television presence, a nostalgia team. Beadle raised horses and watched the sky over North Texas and seemed to find that entirely sufficient. In 2014, there was a two-part ending to the story. First, he was inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America, finally, formally, permanently in the book alongside the sport's all-time great. The induction ceremony was in Detroit in September. Beadle was too ill to attend, because a heart attack in July 2014 had led to surgery for arterial blockages and he was struggling to recover. On October 20, 2014, Raymond Gary Beadle died at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas at the age of 70. He was buried at Sparkman Hillcrest Memorial Park. His full honors at that point included 3 NHRA Funny Car Championships, 3 IHRA Funny Car Championships, 1 NASCAR Winston Cup Championship as a team owner, a ranking of 20th all-time among NHRA's top 50 drivers, induction into the International Drag Racing Hall of Fame, the Texas Motorsports Hall of Fame, and the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America. His son, Ryan Beadle, is now an attorney serving as general counsel for JR Motorsports, Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s operation. The family connection to racing continues in a quieter way, behind the scenes, in the legal and organizational infrastructure rather than behind the wheel, but present nonetheless. The name carries on. Here's what most people don't realize about iconic racing teams. They don't really die. The car, the name, the emblem, the legacy, those things find their way forward if the foundation was built right. Raymond Beadle gave his blessing around 2003 to a Dallas area friend and driver named Ronnie Young. And Ronnie Young made it his actual personal mission to keep the Blue Max on the track for as long as there were tracks to run it on. What followed was years of searching that reads more like a detective story than a restoration project. Young tracked down Beadle's original 1978 Plymouth Aero body. He located an original 1985 Tony Casares Blue Max chassis, complete with its original chassis tag, sitting somewhere in storage waiting to be found by someone who knew what they were looking at. He recovered one of Beadle's original haulers. He even contacted English Leather's European corporate headquarters for permission to use the original sponsor graphics, because Beadle had done the work of trademarking and licensing properly, meaning decades later, someone had to go find the rights holder in Europe and ask nicely. That's what good intellectual property work looks like across a 50-year span. Today, Ronnie Young competes in NHRA Heritage Series Nostalgia Funny Car events and NHRA Nitro Funny Car events, running multiple body configurations, the Aero, the Dodge Omni Wonder Car, and a Ford EXP that was reportedly discovered behind a Texas barbecue restaurant, which is either the most Texas story imaginable or an urban legend that's too good to fact-check. In 2024, he celebrated the 55th anniversary of Blue Max Funny Cars. The car still runs. The logo still flies. The Pour Lumerite emblem still catches the light in the staging lanes at national events, and people who were there in 1979, 1980, and 1981 see it and feel something. That's not nostalgia exactly. It's recognition. The acknowledgement that something real was built here and the building has outlasted the builder. Before Young, Del Worsham created the first Blue Max tribute car, debuted at the Texas Motorplex with Beadle himself present. Its first pass down the track was quicker than any pass the original Blue Max ever ran. Beadle was there to see it. Think about what that moment must have felt like. Watching a car carry your name down a track faster than you ever carried it yourself. There's a version of a person who finds that threatening. Raymond Beadle apparently found it satisfying. That tells you something about who he was. The collectibles market for Blue Max memorabilia is deep and consistent. Auto World produces a 1:18 scale Blue Max 1973 Ford Mustang Funny Car. Johnny Lightning and Racing Champions have made 1/64 versions. Revell and Monogram put out plastic model kits in multiple eras. Original photographs, hero cards, hats, shirts, and body panels show up on eBay in constant rotation, and they move. People buy them. The brand that Beadle copyrighted and built from a movie reference and a trademark filing in the 1970s is still commercially alive more than half a century later. That's what good branding does. It outlasts everything. It outlasts the trophies, which get stored in closets and attics. It outlasts the cars themselves, which get parted out or crushed or lost behind barbecue restaurants. The brand lives because Beadle made it mean something to people who never saw it run in person. So what do we make of Raymond Beadle, taken whole? He's not the most prolific winner in funny car history by raw numbers. John Force has 150-plus national event victories. Prudhomme had 49. Bernstein had 30. Beadle had 13. On that metric alone, he doesn't lead the list, and he probably wouldn't have claimed otherwise. But winning individual races was never the whole story, and Beadle understood that before most people in the sport did. The whole story is a kid from Spur, Texas, who learned to race on 34th Street in Lubbock, who went and won 3 consecutive NHRA championships through composure, consistency, and a crew chief who could fabricate engine components from raw material in a Dallas shop, who simultaneously built a merchandise business and brand identity that didn't exist in drag racing before he invented it, who pursued mainstream corporate sponsors when everyone else was still selling oil and spark plugs, who mentored his competitors and gave John Force's team their first matching uniforms, who crossed over to NASCAR, where nobody expected him to last, and won a Winston Cup championship with Rusty Wallace, and then walked away on his own terms, went back to West Texas, raised cattle and horses, and never particularly felt the need to explain himself to anyone. He had a catchphrase, "No problem." It wasn't just a personality quirk. It was a philosophy. A man who had calculated his position, prepared his team, trusted his people, and done the unglamorous organizational work before the race weekend even started, didn't experience the same crisis that panicked everyone else. When the roof blew off in Pomona, it was literally no problem because Beadle already knew what his next move was. He'd already thought 3 steps ahead of the disaster that hadn't happened yet. That's the rarest kind of champion. Not the one who burns brightest in the crisis moment, but the one for whom the crisis never really arrives because they prepared so thoroughly that nothing is ever truly a surprise. Don Prudhomme said it was hard to not like Raymond Beadle. Imagine competing against someone for 10 years, someone who beats you for the championship, someone who ends your dynasty, and that's your lasting assessment when you look back across all of it. Hard to not like him. Not, he was a great champion. Not, he was the toughest competitor I ever faced. Hard to not like him. Because in the end, what Prudhomme was describing wasn't just a competitor. He was describing a man whose decency and humor and generosity were so genuine and so consistent that even winning at someone's expense didn't cost you the relationship. That's not common in any walk of life. In professional motorsports, where money and ego and pressure combine into something that corrodes a lot of people, it's genuinely exceptional. That's the legacy. Not just the trophies on the shelf or the championships in the record books, though those matter and they're real and they're earned. The legacy is that 50 years later, everybody who was there still smiles when they say the name Blue Max Ronnie Young is still running that car. The merchandise is still selling. The model kits are still being built by kids who weren't born when Beadle retired. John Force still puts him in a list of 5. Billy Meyer named him in a breath alongside the people who shaped his entire professional life. And somewhere in a Dallas storage facility or behind a Texas barbecue restaurant, there's probably another piece of Blue Max history waiting to be found by someone who knows what they're looking at. Raymond Beadle built something that outlasted him. He built it deliberately, legally, creatively, and with the same composure that carried him down every quarter mile he ever ran. And when it was done, he put it down and went home. No problem. If this story hit differently than you expected, that's by design. Because Raymond Beadle is exactly the kind of figure that mainstream sports history glosses over, and exactly the kind of figure that shaped everything you see every time a funny car fires up at a national event today. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories like this one. There are hundreds of them, and most of them are hiding in plain sight, just waiting for someone to look closely enough to see what was really built there. The whole story is a kid from Spur, Texas, who learned to race on 34th Street in Lubbock, who went and won 3 consecutive NHRA championships through composure, consistency, and a crew chief who could fabricate engine components from raw material in a Dallas shop, who simultaneously built a merchandise business and brand identity that didn't exist in drag racing before he invented it, who pursued mainstream corporate sponsors when everyone else was still selling oil and spark plugs, who mentored his competitors and gave John Force's team their first matching uniforms, who crossed over to NASCAR, where nobody expected him to last, and won a Winston Cup championship with Rusty Wallace, and then walked away on his own terms, went back to West Texas, raised cattle and horses, and never particularly felt the need to explain himself to anyone. He had a catchphrase, "No problem." It wasn't just a personality quirk. It was a philosophy. A man who had calculated his position, prepared his team, trusted his people, and done the unglamorous organizational work before the race weekend even started, didn't experience the same crisis that panicked everyone else. When the roof blew off in Pomona, it was literally no problem because Beadle already knew what his next move was. He'd already thought 3 steps ahead of the disaster that hadn't happened yet. That's the rarest kind of champion. Not the one who burns brightest in the crisis moment, but the one for whom the crisis never really arrives because they prepared so thoroughly that nothing is ever truly a surprise. Don Prudhomme said it was hard to not like Raymond Beadle. Imagine competing against someone for 10 years, someone who beats you for the championship, someone who ends your dynasty, and that's your lasting assessment when you look back across all of it. Hard to not like him. Not, he was a great champion. Not, he was the toughest competitor I ever faced. Hard to not like him. Because in the end, what Prudhomme was describing wasn't just a competitor. He was describing a man whose decency and humor and generosity were so genuine and so consistent that even winning at someone's expense didn't cost you the relationship. That's not common in any walk of life. In professional motorsports, where money and ego and pressure combine into something that corrodes a lot of people, it's genuinely exceptional. That's the legacy. Not just the trophies on the shelf or the championships in the record books, though those matter and they're real and they're earned. The legacy is that 50 years later, everybody who was there still smiles when they say the name Blue Max Ronnie Young is still running that car. The merchandise is still selling. The model kits are still being built by kids who weren't born when Beadle retired. John Force still puts him in a list of 5. Billy Meyer named him in a breath alongside the people who shaped his entire professional life. And somewhere in a Dallas storage facility or behind a Texas barbecue restaurant, there's probably another piece of Blue Max history waiting to be found by someone who knows what they're looking at. Raymond Beadle built something that outlasted him. He built it deliberately, legally, creatively, and with the same composure that carried him down every quarter mile he ever ran. And when it was done, he put it down and went home. No problem. If this story hit differently than you expected, that's by design. Because Raymond Beadle is exactly the kind of figure that mainstream sports history glosses over, and exactly the kind of figure that shaped everything you see every time a funny car fires up at a national event today. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories like this one. There are hundreds of them, and most of them are hiding in plain sight, just waiting for someone to look closely enough to see what was really built there.